IB Bio Plant Biology Part 1 will focus on the fundamental aspects of leaf structure and function with an emphasis on the transport of water within a plant. Most plants have vascular tissue, the tissue that transports water and organic compounds, for example, the sugars synthesized during photosynthesis. Now, Plant Biology Parts 1 and 2 focus on the transport of water in a plant in vessels known as xylem vessels. The essential idea is structure and function are correlated in the xylem of plants. Here is the outline of all the available movies for Plant Biology Topic 9 in the IB syllabus. Use this slide to find the movie you need for review. This movie is focused here. The fundamental structure of a leaf is that it's flat. The flatness of the leaf is its form. The flat shape is important to its function. The form is important to its function, and this is primarily because the flat form increases the surface area to volume ratio of the leaf. Why would a high surface area to volume ratio as a form be so important to function? Pay close attention. Consider the high surface area to volume ratio of a leaf and consider photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is likely the most important metabolic process for life on Earth as we know it, and photosynthesis has certain requirements: light, carbon dioxide, and water. Photosynthesis, in addition to the absorption of solar energy, is a gas exchange process. Carbon dioxide diffuses into the leaf from the air, and oxygen is released to the air from the leaf. Water moves into the leaf up from the roots within the xylem of the plant. Chloroplasts within cells of the leaf perform photosynthesis. Without knowing more about photosynthesis than this equation, you should be able to articulate 3 or 4 statements about the form-function relationship of leaves with reference to surface area to volume and the requirements of photosynthesis. Before we look closely at leaf structure, let's step back to look at cross-sectional sketches of tissues of leaf, stem, and root. We will need to focus on the tissues related to the transport of water and sugars produced by photosynthesis. The leaf produces the sugars during photosynthesis, and the sugars must be moved to all living cells within the plant. The root takes up water, and the water must be moved to all living cells within the plant. So there are tissues that extend from the roots to the leaves through the stems. Vascular tissue in the root extends through the stem to the leaf. Vascular tissue transports water and sugars. Vascular tissue extends from the root through the stem to the leaf. The vascular tissue transports water from roots to the upper reaches of the plant, and vascular tissue transports sugars from the leaves to cells throughout the plant. The epidermal layer, a protective layer, is here in leaves and in stems and in root. The vascular tissue in leaves is here and here and here. These are the veins. The vascular tissue in stems are these bundles seen here, and the vascular tissue in roots is here. Now, the vascular tissue will be our focus because the vascular tissue transports water and sugars. The xylem vessels transport water, while the phloem vessels transport sugars. More on this later. The ground tissue lies between the epidermal and the vascular. The ground tissue in leaves serves the important role of photosynthesis. The ground tissue in stems is here and serves the role of supporting the stem with thickened cell walls. And that's similar for the roots, where the ground tissue is here and serves a support function. Can you identify the white, purple, and yellow tissue layers in these plan diagrams, cross-sections, of the leaf, the stem, and the root? The white layer is epidermal and protective. The purple layer is vascular, serving to transport water and sugars, and the yellow layer is ground tissue, and the ground tissue in stems and roots is primarily supportive, while the ground tissue in leaves is actually photosynthetic. Now, as a note and an eye to the future, the plant has actively dividing tissue in regions where the plant grows in length. Actively dividing tissue is known as meristematic tissue. Actively dividing regions include the plant tips, known as apical meristems, here and here. Meristematic tissue in the stem is known as lateral meristem, allowing the plant to grow wider, lateral growth. As we bear down on our study of leaves, the diagram of a leaf can take on more detail. The ground tissue, the middle layer, also known as the mesophyll, is divided into an upper mesophyll, an upper layer known as the palisade mesophyll, and a lower layer known as the spongy mesophyll. The cells of the ground tissue in the leaf are thin-walled and function primarily in photosynthesis. Here's a relevant IB syllabus statement. Explain the relationship between the distribution of tissues in the leaf and the functions of these tissues. This diagram nicely shows the structure of a leaf. Since all the parts are labeled, I will run through function with an emphasis on how the structural form serves the function. The cuticle is a waxy layer on the surface of the epidermal cells. The epidermal layer, here and here, along with the cuticle, protects the leaf but also reduces water loss. The palisade mesophyll layer is composed of tightly packed cells embedded with numerous chloroplasts. As light arrives at the upper surface of the leaf, the palisade mesophyll is important for photosynthesis. The spongy mesophyll layer is composed of loosely packed cells with numerous air spaces, allowing carbon dioxide to enter through the stomata and rapidly diffuse to the cells of the palisade mesophyll that require carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. The vascular tissue, the vein, is here and has its own parts. The lower phloem tissue with more narrow vessels serves to move sucrose from the leaf to other parts of the plant. The upper xylem with wider vessels carries water to the leaf from the stem, ultimately up from the roots. The ring of cells, known as the bundle sheath, serves a role in C4 plants. We looked briefly at C4 and CAM photosynthetic pathways when we studied photosynthesis. These photosynthetic pathways serve to conserve water, and I won't go into either of these here. In this diagram of a leaf, we can see the epidermis, the palisade mesophyll, the spongy mesophyll, and the vein with the xylem and the phloem. As part of the lower epidermis, we can see stomata. It's an opening surrounded by guard cells that regulate the entry of carbon dioxide into the leaf. The stomata also regulate water loss from the leaf in a process known as transpiration. Now, here are the questions you should be able to answer. Why is the palisade mesophyll densely packed with cells that have numerous chloroplasts? Why is the spongy mesophyll loosely packed with numerous air spaces? What is the role of the stomata? What materials move into the leaf through the vein and exit the leaf through the vein? What is the role of the epidermis with its waxy cuticle? Here's a chance to practice the naming of structures and a chance to practice structure-function relationships. You can turn the movie off now or follow along. One is the cuticle, and the cuticle, along with the upper and lower epidermis, serves to protect the leaf and to reduce water loss. 3 and 4 together represent the mesophyll, the ground tissue. These thin-walled cells of the leaf serve the role of photosynthesis. The palisade mesophyll is very active in photosynthesis, as its position is on the upper side of the leaf for the most direct light absorption, and its cells are densely packed to ensure light absorption. The spongy mesophyll is loosely packed with many air spaces to allow carbon dioxide to easily diffuse its way to the palisade cells that require carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. 6 is the stoma, the opening, surrounded by 7, the guard cells. The guard cells regulate the entry of carbon dioxide into the leaf and regulate the exit of water from the leaf by opening or closing the stoma. 8 and 9 together represent the vascular tissue. 8 is the phloem, transporting sugar out of the leaf to other parts of the plant, and 9 is the xylem, moving water into the leaf. In this diagram, we can see water leave the xylem and water evaporating out of the mesophyll cells to become vapor in the air spaces of the spongy mesophyll. Water will then diffuse out of the leaf through the stomata. If the stomata are open to allow carbon dioxide to diffuse into the leaf for photosynthesis, then there is an inevitable loss of water in a process known as transpiration. When the sun is shining and stomata are open, carbon dioxide would enter a leaf. The transpiration of water out of a leaf will be covered thoroughly in Plant Biology Part 2. But transpiration is critical to the continued movement of water up from the roots into the leaf to serve water's important role in photosynthesis. Water, as you know, is a critical input in photosynthesis. Here's an image of a leaf from a group of plants known as monocots. The veins are quite regularly spaced in the monocot leaves because monocot leaves have parallel venation. And you can see in this image, you can see the palisade mesophyll, the more loosely packed spongy mesophyll, the xylem, the big vessels of the xylem, and the more narrow vessels of the phloem. Just to keep you thinking, here is a cross-section of a pond lily leaf. The leaf floats on water, so carbon dioxide cannot enter the leaf through the lower epidermis. The water lily has adapted over evolutionary time to have its stomata on the upper surface. Notice the strong palisade mesophyll layer. Form serves function, and the spongy mesophyll is well adapted to allow the leaves to float on the water surface. I've mentioned the loss of water from the leaves numerous times in this movie. The evaporation of water from the leaf into the air surrounding a leaf is known as transpiration. While the specific physiology of water transport will be left to Plant Biology Part 2, I will touch on it here. Plants living on land, terrestrial plants, cannot afford to lose water. Water is scarce on land, and so one might wonder whether transpiration is beneficial for a plant or not. Transpiration, the evaporation of water from the leaf into the air surrounding that leaf, is necessary, despite the risk of dehydration, as transpiration serves to draw water into the leaf from the stem up from the roots. This diagram shows water coming to the leaves up from the roots in the xylem vessel. It's pulled by the evaporation of water into the air spaces of the spongy mesophyll. Water then leaves the leaves as vapor, water vapor, and this is transpiration. Guard cells on either side of a stoma regulate transpiration. Stomata can be opened or closed by those guard cells. Here's the next IB syllabus statement. Explain why transpiration is the inevitable consequence of gas exchange in the leaf. And here's the definition of transpiration: the loss of water by evaporation in terrestrial plants, especially through the stomata of leaves. This image nicely shows the guard cells that surround the stoma. When full of water, they bow out, opening the stoma. When water has left the guard cell, the cell is flaccid and the stoma closes. Here's a micrograph of an open stoma. On the left, the guard cells are clearly visible. On the right, when water enters the guard cells, they become turgid, bowing out, and the stoma opens. When water leaves the guard cells, they become flaccid and the stoma closes. Here is a micrograph of open stomata. Carbon dioxide enters the leaf when the light is on and photosynthesis is happening. When stomata are open, water also transpires out. Here are two micrographs of stomata. The upper image shows the stoma and the guard cells from a cross-section view. The lower micrograph was taken of the underside of the leaf. We can see many open stomata with the dark guard cells surrounding each stoma. When guard cells are full of water, they are turgid, they curve or bow out, and the stoma opens, as can be seen in this micrograph. When the water moves out of the guard cells, the cells become flaccid and the stoma closes. The question is, what causes water to flow in or out of guard cells so that the regulation of transpiration can occur? When the sun comes up in the morning, light stimulates the production of ATP. This concept should be familiar to you from your study of photosynthesis. ATP, in turn, drives the active transport of potassium ions into the guard cells. Water follows by diffusion. The stoma opens. Low CO2 levels in the leaf also stimulate the opening of stomata. Now, with that, we will look forward to Plant Biology Part 2 to pick up on the transport of water through a plant. But before ending this movie, let me review the classification of plants, a topic I covered in the evolution unit, but bear with me as this is good review for everyone. Throughout this movie, I've been making reference to vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is one of the characteristics that distinguishes plant phyla. The bryophytes, the mosses, have no vascular tissue. Thus, they must live in wet habitats. The phyllocynophytes, the ferns, have vascular tissue, so they can draw water up from the ground in roots and transport that water to the leaves. But phyllocynophytes have no flowers or no seeds. Now, coniferophytes also have vascular tissue, and they display cones as the reproductive structure. Angiospermophytes have vascular tissue and flowers. Here is the IB syllabus statement for this review of plant evolution and classification. Distinguish between the following phyla of plants using simple external recognition features: bryophytes, phyllocynophytes, coniferophytes, and angiospermophytes. The plant kingdom would be best described as photosynthetic, autotroph, multicellular, eukaryotic, cellulose walls, and non-modal, mostly. The bryophytes are the first of the four plant phyla that you need to get to know by key recognition features. Bryophytes, the mosses, have spores, no seeds. Spores are haploid structures released by the plant. There is no vascular tissue. Vascular tissue has vessels serving to bring water up from the roots to the leaves, but bryophytes have no vascular tissue. Thus, they must live in wet environments. Bryophytes do not have true roots, leaves, or stems, and their sperm are mobile, an adaptation to wet environments. I'm sure if you took a walk in the woods, you would be able to identify bryophytes, but you need to be able to state that bryophytes have spores rather than seeds, no vascular tissue, no true roots, leaves, or stems, but that they do have mobile sperm, an adaptation to wet environments. The phyllocynophytes, the ferns, is the second plant phylum you need to get to know. Like bryophytes, phyllocynophytes have no seeds, but they do have vascular tissue and true roots, stems, and leaves. Like bryophytes, phyllocynophytes have swimming sperm, an adaptation to wet environments, but it's also a limitation, as phyllocynophytes and bryophytes do not do well in dry environments. I'm sure if you took a walk in the woods, you would be able to identify phyllocynophytes. Young fern fronds have a fiddlehead appearance, a characteristic of phyllocynophytes. The spores released by both bryophytes and phyllocynophytes are haploid structures released from the underside of the frond. Spores then divide by mitosis to become multicellular structures on which sperm or egg are formed. Don't worry too much about the detail of spores. The coniferophytes are the third plant phylum you need to get to know. Coniferophyte characteristics include cones with seeds, woody stems, narrow needle-like leaves. vascular tissue, and pollen is formed in the male cone. I'm sure if you took a walk in the woods, you would be able to identify coniferophytes, trees with cones and needle-like leaves, vascular tissue, and seeds. These are the pines, the spruces, and the firs. The angiospermophytes are the fourth and final plant phylum you need to know. Characteristics of the angiospermophytes include flowers that produce protected seeds, and this is unlike the coniferophytes that produce a less well-protected seed. Angiospermophytes have vascular tissue, true stems, roots, and leaves, and pollen from the male part of the flower. Among all the plant phyla, the angiospermophyte phylum is the largest, and the flower is the defining characteristic. And this brings us to the end of IB Bio Plant Biology Part 1 with an emphasis on gas exchange in leaves. Plant Biology Part 2 will look more closely at the physiology of water movement into the leaf and then out of a leaf in a process known as transpiration.